So what committee can actually become? It says, during the 1950s, conservative members dominated the Rules Committee and succeeded in blocking civil rights, education and welfare legislation, even bills favored by a majority of House members. So that's how powerful the House Rules Committee can become. I think in this day and age it's a little different. The House Rules Committee pretty much goes along with the majority Speaker of the House, or the Speaker of the House, who comes from the majority party. But in some cases, as I said, the House Rules Committee can become quite powerful. The Senate works in a different way. The Senate doesn't have a House Rules Committee. In the Senate, the majority and the minority leaders both talk about a particular bill, and they both unanimously decide if a bill needs to go through Senate. Okay? Once a bill gets on the floor, which means once a bill is now up for debate, a couple of things can happen to the bill. The first thing, the biggest thing that can happen to a bill is the idea of amendments. And what amendments are is when a bill gets to the floor, people might say, you know, I don't like this aspect of the bill, I don't like that aspect of the bill, and so they can go ahead and start changing little things about the bill and adding things that they feel are either necessary to the bill or that they feel are necessary for them, and they want to go ahead and add them and get them passed so they can go back and tell their constituents how much work they did for them. So these kinds of attachments that are unrelated to a bill sometimes are called riders. And riders are unrelated attachments to a bill that can sometimes help, as the book says, a senator secure passage of a pet project by attaching it to a popular proposal. So let's say you want to get certain roads built in your state. And so what you do is you go ahead and you say, I will only vote for this bill if you attach this particular rider so it can help my particular state. And that way you have a rider. Okay. In the past, once a bill had a whole bunch of amendments, it was sometimes called Christmas tree bills because it had all these, huge amounts of additional funding going away to certain senators, going away to certain Congress people, and the president would have to sign the bill in its entirety. In 1996, I believe, the Congress passed something called the line item veto. And the line item veto was this ability for the president to go ahead and remove those aspects of the bill that had either select taxing and spending aspects that he or she might feel were not really relevant to the bill and were really added along as riders. Okay. Additionally, some bills can have earmarks, and what earmarks are this ability for a bill to say, well, we're going to give this money to a state, or we're going to provide this kind of funding on a national level, but this much funding will be reserved primarily for this kind of activity. So let's say President Obama said we're going to fund a whole bunch of give states money to improve the economy, but the money that we're going to give to improve the economy is going to primarily go towards the construction of roads and bridges. So that is an earmarked amount, right? The amount, even though it's being given to improve the economy, has been earmarked primarily for roads and construction. That's the idea of an earmark, okay? In the Senate, once the bill goes through Senate, there are many ways that bills can be stopped. The most interesting and the most controversial way is a filibuster. And a filibuster allows a senator to speak against a bill, and if the senator feels that, let's say, they feel really strongly about the bill and they know that the bill is going to get voted upon, but they really don't want the vote to happen, they can get to the floor, which means raise their hand and start talking about the bill, and then continue to talk about anything at all, and just keep on talking and keep on talking and keep on talking until either people lose interest, walk out of the room, and so we no longer have what we call quorum. Quorum is the idea that you have to have a certain amount of senators in the room when the Senate is in session in order for them to go ahead and vote for a particular bill. If you lose quorum, you automatically lose the bill for that day, and you have to recreate quorum once enough people walk in. So this idea of filibustering is just that someone comes in, starts talking just to make sure the bill doesn't pass. The record for the longest individual filibuster belongs to Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, who spoke against the Civil Rights Act of 1957 for an uninterrupted 24 hours and 18 minutes. You can stop the filibuster by doing something called a cloture. And a cloture is when 3/5 of Congress gets together, 3/5 of the Senate gets together and says that we will we will stop the filibuster from happening. But even though you can do a cloture, you can still have a post-cloture filibuster that can last for up to 30 hours. As Congress has become more bipartisan, we are seeing more and more and more filibusters continuing, which is kind of sad if you think about it, because it just goes to show you that Congress would rather stop bills and filibuster them and waste time, because remember, our taxpayer dollars are paying for all this, than actually get things done. What other rules are important when Congress is in session? Well, informal rules. Those are the formal rules that we talked about in the earlier slides. Informal rules are that a more senior Congress member obviously has more influence, so there's a huge importance to seniority. Congress members work in terms of a quid pro quo basis, which means if you do something for me, I'll do something for you, and so I'll follow, I'll advocate for your bill if you advocate for mine later on. That's known as log rolling, because they're both rolling the log along the same, on the same direction, okay? In addition, when they do pass certain legislation, this idea of pork barreling becomes a huge issue. As certain senators or certain House reps have to vote on certain legislation, and if their votes become really critical, if their votes become important because, let's say, they're the ones who will make a huge difference to the vote, they can ask for certain things, saying, well, I'm only going to vote for this if you add $50 million worth of road construction into my state. Okay, so they add this bit of pork almost to the bill just to incentivize the senator to vote. That is known as pork barrel legislation. Okay, so why is Congress increasingly partisan? Well, this graph shows you why. If you look at the top graph, in 1972, the liberal scores, or how liberal Congress was, pretty much goes across the board for both the Democrats and the Republicans. There are some liberal Republicans, there are some liberal Democrats, there are some highly conservative Republicans, there are some highly conservative Democrats. If you look at the lower part of the screen on the new Senate 2008-2010 liberal scores, what do you see? Well, you see the fact that all the Democrats are on one side, the red lines, and all the Republicans are on the other side. They've become highly conservative, and the Democrats have become highly liberal, and as a result, it's becoming harder and harder for both these kinds of parties to actually talk to each other. And that becomes a huge issue if you think about it, because, again, you want them to talk to each other. You want bipartisanship so that bills can get passed. If bills don't get passed, if bills don't become laws, the government stops running. In fact, that's what we had a couple of months ago, or almost a year ago. We had a government shutdown. We do not want that to happen. How do members make voting decisions? Personal views. They value their personal value systems. The way they look at the world makes a huge difference. Their constituents, especially if it's a House member and every 2 years he or she has to get re-elected, they want to keep their constituents happy. If their constituents have really strong views about immigration, let's say, they're going to vote the way their constituents feel they need to vote. Their political party. Political parties are important for providing funding for campaigns, for providing funding for re-election. So you want to vote the way your political party feels you ought to vote. The president. If the president is from your party, then you will, in most cases, follow his or her cues and go ahead and vote the way he or she wants you to vote. Interest groups. Interest groups are important for re-election. They provide money, they campaign for you, they make sure that you stay in office. They say good things about you. They keep the interest alive for you, so you are going to listen to them when they lobby for certain bills, and you're going to make your voting decisions based on what they say. Congressional staff works for you. They understand your viewpoints, they understand your value systems. So the kind of research that they do and the kind of inferences they make on certain bills are inferences that you would have made if you had researched the bill yourself. So again, you would listen to your congressional staff. Colleagues. No Congress member operates in a vacuum. They work with people. They log roll, as we talked about. They do a whole bunch of quid pro quo. So they will listen to each other and try to figure out, how their colleagues are voting, and based on their colleagues will vote accordingly. So that's how this diagram pretty much shows you how a bill becomes a law. A bill is proposed in the House and the Senate. You have subcommittees and House committees that recommend and take a look at the bill. Once the House committees look at the bill and examine and say, okay, this bill needs to get to the floor, which means needs to be debated, then the Rules Committee takes a look at the bill and goes ahead and puts the bill on the floor, which means it starts the debate. Both the House and the Senate will debate and pass the bill. By now, the bill obviously has had some amendments. We've talked about pork barreling, we've talked about riders, we've talked about all these things. So all these things have now happened, and now the bill is quite different in the Senate, and the bill is quite different in the House. So now you need the conference committees who go through both the bills and try to find a bill that is acceptable to both the House and the Senate. Once that compromise has reached, the bill then gets to the President. And the President, so it goes from conference action to the President, and the President has the power to either go ahead and pass the bill or go ahead and veto the bill. Congress has power over the President, however. The Congress can say, even if the President vetoes the bill, Congress may override the veto by 2/3 majority in both houses, which means Congress can say, well, fine, you veto it, but as long as we have a 2/3 majority in the House, in both the House and in the Senate, we're going to go ahead and veto the President's veto and pass the bill. So this rarely happens because Congress wants to work with the President, but in certain cases, especially now where we have a Congress that is so far removed from the President, this could be an issue. Okay, in the Obama Congress, we have a Congress that really does not work very well with the President. So they've been blocking legislation back and forth. Whenever the President proposes something, the Obama, it goes against President Obama. When President Obama proposes something, Congress doesn't want to do it. So they've done a couple of things here that keep the government working. The first thing that they've done is something called an omnibus bill, which is they take a bunch of bills that everyone, has some stake in, and they cobble them all together. So these are 4 or 5 mega bills, and they're called omnibus bills. And then they want to pass the bill either through the House and the Senate. Because let's say there are 5 bills that have been made into a mega bill. You agree with 4 of them. You don't agree with the 5th one. But you know that if you don't pass the bill, all 5 will lose. You might go ahead and pass it just so that you can get the big 4 things and let go of the 5th one. And that's called an omnibus bill. You can also do what is known as a continuing resolution, which means all bills or all laws have end dates, which means after a certain time, a law has to be revised. Well, if you don't want to talk about the law, if you think that there is just too much there isn't enough bipartisanship, and there's just too much opposition to a particular law, and both sides cannot agree on it, Congress can then go ahead and say, well, we're going to agree to disagree, and we're going to continue the current resolution and just keep on kicking the can down the road. That is known as a continuing resolution. So a lot of continuing resolutions are happening these days in Congress. Another thing is the budget reconciliation process, which means that Congress can go ahead and reconcile the budget such that we can actually make Congress work. In 2012, what's going to happen? Well, the elections happened just recently, and we elected a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate. And hopefully, I think what we're hearing is that voters were just sick of Congress not working, and they wanted to make sure that Congress actually gets some work done. Now that we have a Congress where both the House and the Senate are basically run by one particular party, maybe this time now we can get some work done. So we will see what happens to Congress in the 21st century.